Bien, c'est un plaisir et un honneur pour cette deuxième session de la matinée d'accueillir ma chère collègue Magdalena Łaptas, qui est historienne de l'art et archéologue, qui a travaillé au Musée national de Varsovie pendant 17 ans et co-organisé à cette occasion plusieurs expositions comme Banganarty, Proskinetaria ou encore In the Sun and Desert. Depuis 1999, elle mène un certain nombre de projets de recherche et d'enseignement à l'université Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski à Varsovie, et elle a pris part à plusieurs campagnes de fouilles à Banganarty au Soudan, Kaftoun et Ma'had au Liban et Marea en Égypte. Ses principaux domaines de recherche sont l'art de l'Antiquité tardive et de la période byzantine, avec une spécialisation autour de l'Éthiopie et de la Nubie. Elle a notamment publié les peintures de la cathédrale nubienne de Pharas. Et aujourd'hui, c'est au sujet de la perception de la couleur en Nubie médiévale à travers le prisme des peintures murales des églises qu'elle va nous parler.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you hear me well? Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. I must admit that color played an important role in my life, color in Nubia. I wrote my first paper a long time ago on Nubian painting. Unfortunately, it was published in 1996, black and white. So 2 years ago, I decided to re-edit it in color. However, when I started my work, it turned out it would be better to write a book, which I'm currently occupied with and plan to finish it by the end of the next year. Before I discuss issues related to the topic of my paper, I would like to present a short introduction to the history of Nubia, where 3 kingdoms arose after the fall of Kingdom Meroe, after the middle of the 4th century. So it was Nobadia to the north, with the capital in Pharas or Kasibrim. Then more south, Makuria with the capital in Dongola between the 3rd and 5th cataracts, and finally southernmost Alodia below the 5th cataract with the capital in Soba. It is known that Christianization missions set off to Nubia in the 6th century. John of Ephesus wrote in his ecclesiastical history that Justinian sent a Melkite Chalcedonian mission to northern Nubia, to the land of Nobades who invaded the Roman Thebaid. Their Christianization was supposed to contribute to the cessation of aggression. However, when Theodora learned about this, she sent her own mission, a Miaphysite one, and she frightened the Duke of Thebaid to cut his head if the Justinian mission would arrive earlier. However, we are not sure about this story because John of Ephesus was Miaphysite himself. And finally, we know that in the 6th century, all 3 Nubian kingdoms were converted into Christianity. And then, as we can see, there was a conquest of Egypt in the 7th century, and then Arab forces set up to conquer also Nubia. They arrived till Old Dongola. However, Nubia had very good walls and very good archers, which were well known from ancient Egypt. So finally, Arabs didn't conquer Nubia, but they made agreement, a kind of a pact, which was signed, and then it was renewed for many, many years. And then in 1317, it was the date when Christianity started to decline a little bit, but we can speak that Christian art was developed in Nubia between the 6th and even 14th, 15th centuries. And Polish adventure with Nubia started during the so-called Nubian campaign, when Kazimierz Michałowski, who was creator of the Mediterranean School of Polish researcher, went to Pharas in 1961, and then he conducted his excavations for 4 years. And in 1974, he published his book, Pharas. It contained paintings only from Pharas Gallery in Warsaw, but it was translated into French, German, English, of course, it was also in Polish. And in this book, he presented his method, and he wrote that style and color are interchangeable. And what was strange to me, that his followers developed this method. So Michałowski divided Nubian art into so-called color style, like violet, white, yellow, red, and multicolored styles. And even his students developed it to make more detailed division. But what was dangerous in this method, in my opinion, was that they started to date paintings according to this style. So, for example, if something was violet, they wrote that it was from 8th century and so on. However, we have to take into consideration that, first of all, Michałowski had never experience in searching for Christian art, because he wrote his thesis about Niobites in ancient art, then his PhD quite early, having 28 on Doric art, and all his excavations were about Egyptian, Greek art. So I think that he treated this medieval art a little bit with his intuition, you know, like modern art that, you know, but medieval art was quite different than modern art. First of all, color had symbolic meaning. So, for example, when apostles were painted in white robes, it meant that there was purity, internal light. We can see the scene from Sinai, where there is transformation of Christ, and the white light goes from his robes. So, and the second thing is that he didn't took into consideration writing about it, because his idea was that he started with linear styles and then came to multicolors. That the paintings, for example, in Farah's cathedrals were painted on 2 layers of plaster. So the state of preservation of this earlier painting was poorer than the later one. And also during the restoration, I don't know if I have time to explain process maybe in discussion how they took off this painting from the walls, but this was process who took some color, in my opinion, from the paintings. So the oldest one were not preserved so well as the later one. And then when the paintings was cleaned in the museum, also there was small destruction. And unfortunately there were, so if we look at this, for example, image of St. John Chrysostomos, we can at the first sight think that it was yellow and white, but then we can see that there were also green lines under the eyes and above brown. So we have to take in consideration how these paintings looked at the beginning, not how they were seen after discovery. And Professor Pastoro wrote also about it, that we have to take into consideration the different stages of the colors in the history. And also I noticed something interesting. This is the painting of 3 use from Farah's Cathedral. It was published in 1967 by Michałowski in his book Die Kathedrale, and when we can see the outline of the wings is blue, but when I saw it after conservation in the Hartum Museum, we can see that this outline is black. So we have to take into consideration of these factors speaking about colors. And I had opportunity to take part in excavations in Banganarti, and I was present during discovery of the beautiful paintings of the kings in the chapels of this church. And what I could see, that the colors after discovery were really strong. Look at these blue fragments, and also on the vestment of the king. So this color after discovery was very, very intensive. And also another factor is that when we speak about, for example, colors in Nubia, we can't speak only about what we see, but what these painters meant and iconographic creators meant. Because, for example, in Byzantium, very rich dye was very expensive. Dye was purple, and we know that it was regained from snails, and emperors who were born in the purple room were named Porphyrogenites. And after the council in Ephesus, when Mother of God was claimed Theotokos, God-bearer, she also was represented as empresses in purple robes. However, in Nubia, they had no original purple. They used just ochre for this vestment, but what we can see is maybe deep red, but it was meant as purple, and it was not connected with particular period. In different period they painted, because it was symbolical meaning of this painting. And our restorer Wojciech Chmiel made some experimental archaeology. He found out this ochre around the excavations, and he went down and he found also yellow ochre, but what we treat as yellow could be also meant by creators of this painting as gold. Because, for example, when we look at this archangel, which is now in Louvre, I think, in deposit in Louvre, we can see that he has got yellow dress, yellow wings, yellow halo, but this halo should be golden in their mind, because aureola is made of gold. So we have to take this difference into consideration. They were not so rich as Byzantine creators, but they wanted to imitate what in Byzantium was. And we know also that a very important factor was also glittering in Byzantium and light. So when, for example, they painted the vestment of the archangels, I think that they wanted to reach this effect of glittering, as we can see on this example of archangel, which is now in the National Museum in Warsaw. And so far I compared Nubian art to the Byzantine now, but now I want to say about features which are typical for this painting, and they were their own idea. It was representing historical figures as brown, and here we can see Bishop Kyros from Faras Cathedral, and we can see that he has got the dark brown skin, and but they painted their own historical figures as brownish, whereas saints with white faces. And it is very interesting division, in my opinion, because it's a kind of convention which was treated in this painting. And why I show bishops, because we have got a list of bishops. It was preserved next to the painting of Christ. You can see between Christ and Archangel, and it was read by Stefan Jakobielski, so it is easy to date when each bishop was on their seat. But here we can see another Bishop Marianos. He has not so dark skin, but rather olive one, and so there is the aspect of reality, I think, in this portrait. Not everybody bishop was painted in the same way. Of course, not only bishops, but also kings and queens. And here we can see Queen Mother Martha, who is under protection of the Virgin with a child. So there are a lot of examples of such a painting. And I'm not able to show you all of them. That's why I decided to write a book finally, because when I started to deepen the subject, I think that it is very interesting on the background of the Mediterranean. And finally, I want to show you that the Nubians differentiated brown from black, because here we can see Christ in the scene of Anastasis. He's trampling Hades, and Hades is black. So I think that black had negative meaning in Nubia, whereas brown was different. So there were very important differences in the stones, you know, between black, brown, olive-like, and so on. And in the end, I would like to show you that color is very important in understanding this painting, also with identification of these paintings, because here we can see a part of the painting which is very destroyed, but it comes from chapel number 6 in Banganarti upper church, and we can see here a hand holding a crown. And thanks to the color of this hand, it's a kind of camelaukion, so Byzantine kind of crown. But because this hand is olive color, we can be sure that it is Nubian, not the saint. So I think that it is very important to describe precisely color after excavations. Unfortunately, a lot of paintings after excavations were published in black and white. For example, Monaret de Villard published 4 volumes books, but it was in 1950s. So it is difficult, and descriptions are also very vast, so we can't learn much about colors. So I hope that my work and also will also contribute to better understanding the meaning of color in Nubia and importance, and also I hope that it will be easier to introduce Nubia into general Mediterranean area of studies, because I think that it is worth of this. Nubia and its painting is worth to be treated as a part of the medieval Mediterranean tradition. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Magdalena, de nous avoir ouvert à cet aspect largement méconnu des études byzantines au sens très large et qui présente par surcroît beaucoup de liens avec l'étude des manuscrits éthiopiens et nubiens dont nous pourrons reparler. C'est maintenant un plaisir de présenter Thomas Reiner de l'université de Zurich, que j'ai appris à connaître dans le cadre de l'étude des manuscrits menée avec l'équipe de Maurizio Aceto, et qui va aborder un des aspects les plus caractéristiques de ses recherches actuelles. Alors, en tant qu'historien de l'art, il est spécialisé sur tous les aspects de la culture manuscrite, depuis les reliures précieuses lombardes jusqu'aux supports et aux colorants des manuscrits ottoniens. Et ses recherches, de la Bibliothèque nationale de France jusqu'à Munich, l'ont mené à organiser plusieurs expositions, notamment sur la Bible au Teintes, le plus ancien témoin survivant de l'enluminure germanique. Plus récemment, il a travaillé sur les rapports entre le livre chrétien et juif, d'un point de vue matériel, d'un point de vue de la culture matérielle, et d'un point de vue aussi des liens entre la culture religieuse et l'abord technique, physique presque, du texte sacré. Actuellement, ces recherches se concentrent sur l'utilisation des colorants pourpres sur les parchemins dans les manuscrits ottoniens, et c'est pourquoi la communication qu'il va nous présenter à présent s'intitule « Sous des cieux pourpres, colorants et cieux dans les manuscrits ottoniens ».
Thank you very much, François, for the invitation to this conference, and also to Charlotte, and I'm very glad to speak here. I begin this lecture with a quote from the famous Viennese art historian Ernst Gombrich. Over 70 years ago, in his most successful book, The Story of Art, he warned against the common inclination to reduce the colors of the sky to simple blue. If we try to forget all we have heard about green grass and blue skies and look at the world as we had just arrived from another planet, we may find that things are apt to have the most surprising colors. So, unfortunately, I didn't come to Paris from another planet, but from Switzerland. So let us defer the look from outer space and the awe-inspiring astronomical spectacle of Aurea Borealis, polar light, just seen in a photo from 2 weeks ago, for the moment. I started my journey by passing through Bâle. In the hall of the station, you can see a picture that aptly illustrates Gombrich's cliché of green grass and blue skies. In this postcard depiction of Le Cervin in the Swiss Alps, green and blue stand metonymically for earth and sky. The green zone below is clearly separated from the blue above. In between, a strip of white snow affirms this separation and the direction from green below to blue above. This simple model of separating earth and sky is deeply ingrained in our modern understanding of color and intimately linked to the story of the rise of blue from the 12th century onwards, so ingeniously studied by Michel Pastoureau 20 years ago. Just look at two pioneering early 20th century color photographs that celebrate the human triumph over gravity. Also, photographers have long struggled to depict a saturated blue. The composition here still relies on the contrast between two strictly separated zones of green below and blue above. The airman dangles between two bands of color separated by the wings of his aeroplane. What cultural echoes in the war book sense are reflected in this ascent by means of breaking through from one separated color zone to another? As a parallel, one could cite a miniature of the Ascension of Christ in an early 11th century manuscript from Fulda, discussed by Nancy Debeau in a recent article on banded grounds of early medieval paintings. At first glance, there are surprising similarities. Just like our aviator, the ascending Christ is dangling between a green color band at the bottom and a blue band at the top. But there are also striking differences. In the miniature, green and blue are not stacked directly one above the other, but there is a color band between them, a middle zone of gradual light pinkish orange tones. It is this zone of white, pink, orange, violet, and purple which will be the focus of my presentation today. Although there are few contemporary studies that are devoted on this color band in Ottonian manuscripts, it had a prominent place in the art historical discussion of the medieval relation of color and space in the early 20th century. Following Albert Böckler, Ernst Gombrich explained the development of this middle zone as an abstraction that late antique book painting inherited from ancient color perspective. For Böckler, the pink band that we see below the sky in late antique illuminated manuscripts from the early 5th century, such as the Vergilius Vaticanus, or to cite a biblical manuscript, the Quedlinburg Itala fragment, denotes the horizontal line that separates the solid grayish-blue ground in the middle of the picture from the grayish-blue, violet, or sometimes greenish sky above, that often, but not always, is depicted in lighter tones than the ground below. The horizontal line is sometimes emphasized by the insertion of the rough outlines of hills or buildings drawn in grayish color at the bottom of the pink band. Böckler insisted that the pink color should be understood as an atmospheric phenomenon, unrelated to the reddish glow at sunset. I quote from his comments on the Quedlinburg Itala fragment. It is the dye of the sky on the horizon that one finds in southern regions when the light of the sun is strong, end of quote. We can see what Böckler meant by looking at another early photograph of two pilots conquering the sky. Here the blue has given way to a light pinkish tone above the wings of the plane that gradually fades away into a light touch of white and bluish gray. It was the achievement of the now almost forgotten art historian Miriam Schild-Bunim to examine the transformation of this late antique atmospheric color gradation in Ottonian illumination. In her dissertation, Space in Medieval Painting and the Forerunners of Perspective, which she defended at Columbia University in the 1940s, she distinguishes a twofold reception. On the one hand, manuscripts like the 10th century Codex Egberti from the draft master of the Registrum Gregori show a light pink graded sky that comes very close to the ancient color perspective, but can extend the light pinkish zone of the horizon over the whole sky. On the other hand, manuscripts like the early 11th century Reichenau pericopes, a gospel lectionary now housed in the Herzog August Library in Wolfenbüttel, or the Reichenau sacramentary for the Church of Trèves, now at the BNF, transform the ancient color gradation into a stratified background that combines distinct color zones with little overlap. Schildbunim interpreted this stratification as symptom of a development that led from ancient spatial conception of different color planes leading inside the picture to a flat background of ornamental stripes stacked vertically one above the other, an interpretation mostly accepted by the subsequent research. Scholars focused primarily on one particular element of this stratification, the gold ground and its spatial relationship to the figures framed by this ground. Nancy Debeau and Vincent Debillet rightly pointed out that the vertical stratification could also be read as layering of overlying zones, something obvious when one looks at the angels of the Ascension, whose lower bodies are hidden by the color plane, which is shown not only below, but also in front of the angels. What up to now was largely missing in this discussion has been a reconsideration of the colors. These can not only be read as spatial elements, but also as materials and flavors. To explain what I mean by this pairing, allow me a little sacrilegious comparison. On the right, you see a stratified image that features a remotely similar vertical stacking of color zones used as background for an ascent, and in this case also for a descent, depicted as downhill skiing. What is interesting, so, is that the color zones are far more than an abstract representation of a mountain landscape with different climate zones and their optical properties, or to put it differently, a stratified abstraction of the spatial relationship of atmospheric phenomena. In order to understand the color properties of the different strata, they also must be read as materialized flavors. The colors obviously stand for lemon, raspberry, and woodruff. Now, of course, any serious chemist will tell you that the flavors do not make the colors. The colorants of the ice cream are chemically different from its flavors. It is the addition of artificial colorants to the ice cream that creates colors which then can be representative of the materialized flavors. In this sense, it is perfectly legitimate to have a painting Bhutto depicted flying on top of the ice cream mountain. To know exactly what he is doing and what relationship there is between material and flavor, we have to first know the materials and techniques used to produce this ice cream. And I have to say that Maurizio also worked as a food chemist, so this is quite a fitting analogy. The same is true for our Ascension image. We have to use the whole analytic knowledge and savvy of the chemist and the painting expert first, and then reflect on the flavors materialized. I will do so by looking at depictions of the skies in scenes of ascent as well as descent from heaven in several Ottonian manuscripts produced between the late 10th and the 11th century. We were able to examine these manuscripts and analyze their painting materials in the BNF, in the Bamberg State Library, the St. Gall Abbey Library, and the Herzog August Library in Wolfenbüttel. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all representatives of these libraries, especially Charlotte Desnoël from the BNF, without whom this project would have never been possible. I also like to thank my collaborators who carried out the material analysis, Maurizio Aceto and his fabulous team, who did the false analysis, and my colleague Katharina Schmidt-Ott and Tiziana Lombardo from the Conservation Laboratory of the Swiss National Museum, who did the XRF. So let us start with a look at the two Reichenau extension miniatures. Firstly, the Wolfenbüttel Pericopes, a luxurious manuscript with lections of the Gospel, produced in the early 11th century at the Abbey of Reichenau. The Ascension miniature is structured by 3 different color zones that form the background. At the bottom, behind the lower half of the central tree, symbolizing the living wood of the cross, there is a green band. Above it, a larger middle zone that can best be described as light violet, and at the top there is another band in pink. For the green, the painter used verdigris, a copper-based pigment. For the light violet, most likely a mixture of cockit dye and ultramarine blue, the latter a pigment obtained from the semi-precious mineral lapis lazuli. And for the pink, he used only cockit dye, lac cockit dye, an organic red colorant that can be extracted from various species of dried scale insects and was introduced in Western illumination at the end of the 10th century. And this is one aspect of our work we are still working on, when this cockit dye was introduced and by whom. The scriptorium of Reichenau was one of the first to use this colorant. The colorants could be mixed with white lead to influence the hue and give the color a lighter appearance. In fact, the painter masterfully added some lead white lines to the upper edges of the color zones, giving the impression of a glow at the top of the violet and pink zone. If we compare the stratified sky of cockit dye and cockit dye mixed with ultramarine blue to the sky in the Ascension miniature in the slightly later Reichenau Sacramentary, now housed in the BNF, there are similarities but also interesting differences. Instead of 2 color zones to depict the sky, the Sacramentary has 4. The upper part, above Christ's outstretched arms, shows 2 colors that at first glance seem similar to the Wolfenbüttel manuscript, a light violet, and above it, in a somewhat fluid transition, a pink band fading out in a thin white strip at the top. While the colorants of the violet are the same as in Wolfenbüttel, cockit dye mixed with ultramarine blue, the pink, also the color tone resembles the Wolfenbüttel pink, consists of different colorants, namely a mixture of indigo and red lead. Below this upper zone is a broad band of gold. In the middle and further below, behind the apostles, angels, and Mary, a zone of violet gray. It is made of ochil, a lichen dye that is used for purple colors mixed with ultramarine blue. The green at the bottom is again the copper pigment verdigris. The most interesting aspect of this comparison is undoubtedly the mixing of colorants. Compared to our modern color sensibility, it is striking to find that the most luminous blue pigment of the Middle Ages, ultramarine blue, which was produced from the expensive semi-precious stone lapis lazuli, found what is now Afghanistan, was not used to make a pure sky blue, but to flavor the gradation of violet and pinkish hues by mixing it with cockit dye and ochil dyes. Here I show a microscopic image of the mixture of cockit dye and the pigment lapis lazuli from the zone above the arms of Christ in the BNF Sacramentary, a mixture that appears as light gray shade of violet. It is not the only instance in this manuscript to influence the hues of the sky by mixing lapis and cockit dyes. Another telling example is the miniature following the Ascension image. Another telling example is the miniature following the Ascension image, the depiction of the open sky in the scene of Pentecost, where the Holy Spirit descends upon the 12 apostles who prefigure the church. The blue shades of ultramarine, which color the outermost ring of descending light containing the flames of the Holy Spirit, are interwoven in a graded violet sky that once again mixes ultramarine and coquetaille to represent a relationship of up and down, in this case not in form of an ascent, but a descent of light. The argument here is not at all about the purity of color in the modern self-referential sense that a pure color is a color that is not only represented, but also materialized by its pure, unaltered pigment. The topic here is instead the purity of light and the ability to see it. In a fundamental reflection on this theme, the Church Father Ambrose compared the ability of the Church to see the pure light of heaven to the morning dawn. According to Ambrose, the rising sun at the horizon is always interwoven in a multitude of color shades between darkness and light, which makes it impossible to see the pure light of heaven, which will be revealed only in the world to come. The reddish dawn, called aurora in Latin, perfectly embodies this shading for Ambrose. Heaven in this world appears, and here I quote, stitched upon, being often interwoven with clouds and mist and the darkness of night, and the golden redness of the rising day, a various and multicolored sight. Diversa ac discolora specie sepe contextum. It is precisely this boundary between the visibility and the invisibility of the rising light on the horizon that is materialized in the shaded dyes that mix different and varied colorants in the depiction of the Ascension in the Reichenau manuscript. The shaded golden redness, described in Latin as glauceus, saffron red, or synonymously as purpureus, purple, consisting of various and different interwoven colorants in a spectrum ranging from grayish blue to violet to pink and reddish orange, incorporates the cloud that, according to Acts 1:9, took Jesus out of sight of the apostles as they watched him lifted up. The pink horizon, therefore, precisely marks the border between visibility and invisibility. Aurora, the morning dawn on the horizon, was often imagined by Roman poets such as Virgil in shadowy, reddish hues. It is to Virgil's Georgica that Ambrose is referring in his description of the dawn. If one compares the depiction of the rising sun in the Vergilius Romanus with the Reichenau Ascension, the similarities in color hues are striking. This is all the more true if one also considers the pinkish zone that denotes the horizon in other Vergilius Vaticanus miniatures, such as the depiction of Laocoon. However, it is not a similarity in colorants used, but only in the effects. According to Maurizio Acceto's force measurement, a gray-blue indigo and a light pinkish madder define the horizon in the Vergilius Vaticanus. In the Paris Reichenau Sacramentary, the similar horizontal boundary is a mixture of indigo as well as red lead and lead white, whereas below there is coquetaille mixed with ultramarine blue. Above, we do not see an indigo sky, but the pinkish-white horizon itself is the ultimate limit of the sky in this miniature, which is different from the grayish-blue indigo band above the pink horizontal band in the Vergilius Romanus. In the Reichenau pericopes from Wolfenbüttel too, the pure light of heaven is invisible to our eyes. To become perceptible to the senses, it must manifest itself in diverse and multiple color mixtures that here combine cocked dye and ultramarine blue in a gradation from light violet to pink. The Pentecost miniatures that follow the Ascension scene show how this process of the materialization of light in diverse color mixtures was conceived. To become visible, light needs a medium with which it could mix. According to ancient and early medieval color theory, this process is best described when the rays of the sun penetrate mist and clouds. This is the case in the morning, in the misty dawn, when the sun rises, or in a thunderstorm, when a rainbow is formed. The mixture of light and clouds in these instances were compared to purple dyeing. I quote an ancient Sous Seneca, so purple dye, so this is the quote, so purple dye, purpura, from the same shell does not come out in one type. It makes a difference how long it has been soaked, whether it has taken on a thicker application or a more diluted one, whether it has been dipped once or boiled twice or more often. Since there are two things, the sun and the clouds, that is, the object and the mirror, it is no surprise that as many types of colores are produced as can be intensified or subdued in many ways. For one color comes from a fiery light, another from a duller light, and another from a softer light. It may come as a surprise that purple is used here as an explanation for the multicolored nature of aurora and the rainbow. The change in color when looking at purple fabrics and the dependence of their luster on both the viewer's position towards the viewed object and the incidence of sunlight fooled such color theoretical considerations. What is meant becomes perfectly clear when looking at the Pentecost miniatures. The rays of divine light becoming manifest in a rainbow cloud, which combine intensified and subdued colors with thicker and more diluted application. The refraction of the light on the surface of the uneven page, which will be turned and therefore changes the angle of incidence, multiplies this shading effect, something obvious in the dark clouds that form the gold surface above the heads of the apostles. When we look at the main components of this color vision, we see that the sky is formed by colors which are notoriously hard to define. The Latin saffron, croceus, which is represented by the yellow ochre, and the purple, which is represented by this mixture of ochre dye, dye and cocked dye with ultramarine blue. I end this lecture with a look at two Pentecost miniatures of roughly the same time period, but from different scriptoria that perfectly embody this vision. On the left-hand side, you see the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on the gathered nations. The miniature comes from a sacramentary produced in Cologne at the turn of the 10th and the 11th century for the Church of St. Gereon, and is now in the BNF. The sky is formed of various bands of color ranging from dark violet to grayish blue to dark and light pink purple, highlighted and interwoven with white lines. The colors are produced with more or less diluted mixtures of lichen dye ochre, which was in turn combined with ultramarine blue to create the gray and darker violet hues. The interwoven ornaments within the color stripes are abbreviations for clouds. It is particularly interesting, as explained in the text cited above, mist and clouds are dyed with the same purple colorants that are also used to paint the purple dyed clothes of the various nobles below. Using a slightly different painting technique of thinner stripes of ochre as well as cockit dye mixed with ultramarine blue and highlighting lines in red lead and lead white, the same effect was achieved in the St. Gallen sacramentary shown on the right, which dates to the mid-11th century. Let us conclude with a detailed look on the boundary line where the divine light meets mist and clouds and thus becomes visible. The fiery flames of the Holy Spirit are not depicted as simple red tongues, as we would expect when we think of green grass and blue skies. Rather, they are stormy waves of deep violet purple overshadowed by white highlights. This extremely impressive vision of a dark purple sky lit up by the light gathered in the clouds is a far cry from simply blue. Its closest relative is not the alpine ridge as imagined by 19th century artists, but the materials and flavors of Aurora Borealis.
Merci beaucoup Thomas, il nous reste quelques minutes pour des questions. And if I may, I will begin with a question to Magdalena Łaptas. Did you consider the possibility to make analysis of the colors and maybe to make comparisons with Nubian or Ethiopian manuscripts?
Yes, so if you could come to my presentation.
Sure.
Go down to the end, almost to the end. Maybe, no, just okay. You can, and go to the end of this presentation. No. A little bit upper, I will show you, because there was a book published about, and my colleague made a project about it. Okay, no.
Where?
I will show you. Because there was the research made by my colleague Dobrowna Zielińska, who published this book about techniques and conservations, and it is already published. So, but we have not so much manuscript from Nubia, So, but of course there are few. So it is of course possible to do it, But she wrote about medieval wall paintings, and she published it already. So, if you need to get some information, you can get from this.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour vos communications très intéressantes. J'avais une question pour Thomas. Le sacramentaire de Wyszynski que tu as monté avec la bande d'or.
Oui.
Et la gradation de lumière au-dessus. En dessous, au-dessus. Comment est-ce que... Voilà, c'est ça. Celui-ci, puis d'autres. Comment est-ce que tu situes l'or dans cette gradation de couleurs?
Oui. I answer in English, if possible. I think there is a close relationship between the Latin term groceus, which means saffron yellow reaching until saffron reddish dyes, and the gold. Groceus was also described as gold, as was purpureus. And when you look at this miniature, as well the Reichenau miniature from the Sacramentary in Paris, as the Wolfenbüttel miniature, you see that the highest point of the sky is painted with yellow ochre, which represents this groceus. And this is taken up in the gold band below. So the gold band and the violet band and the yellow band form one gliding means to express what can be glauceus and purpureus. So, and the interesting thing is that exactly this mixture of different shades that even becomes more impressive when you leave the manuscript was intended by the artist. It is not our modern understanding that each of these color zones has a defined meaning that is different from each other, but exactly they play on the whole meaning that could be put into these uncertain Latin terms.
Perhaps now in English. I would just add to that because it's very interesting. Crocus is also the alchemical term for gold.
Yes.
And I think the difference, the material difference is that you can't make these nice intermingling with gold, or it's very difficult, as you can do with the color. So,
yeah.
But there's also this aspect of croceus.
Yes.
It adds gold.
May I ask a question? I would like to ask the question about this aurora. I don't remember what is the date of this Virgilius, the 6th century or later?
It's the turn of the 4th to the 5th century.
Ah, okay. Because I have idea that personification from ancient time were painted in different colors. For example, Nubia, or not Nubia, India on mosaics, on Roman mosaics was black, you know, so maybe it is also connected with this idea that in ancient Egypt, for example, gods were painted with different colors, like Osiris was green, so maybe it comes from this idea that aurora is pink because it is a kind of personification here.
Yes, I think it is a personification, but not in our modern sense, that we say pink is aurora. The interesting thing is, to depict aurora, you have to depict a shading from dark violet tones to lighter pinkish tones. And exactly this shading that can't be defined as in a personification, where a color stands for a person, is the difference between our modern notion of color iconography and an ancient understanding which has to take account of these shades in the colors.
J'avais une dernière question. Tu as parlé aussi beaucoup des mélanges.
Oui.
Qui permettent de faire des gradations, des mélanges de matériaux. Et est-ce que c'est l'emploi de ces mélanges dans la palette des artistes ottoniens, est-ce que c'est, par exemple, à l'époque ottonienne, ou est-ce que déjà, avant les ottoniens, est-ce qu'on avait déjà beaucoup de mélanges chez les carolingiens, par exemple, ou est-ce que ces mélanges sont de plus en plus employés avec les ottoniens?
Oui.
Est-ce qu'il y a un basculement ou pas?
Oui. Yes, yes. There is a change in this using of mixtures in color tones and in colorants, sorry. You can effectively date it in the late 10th century, where we see that the palette opens up to these mixtures to a much larger degree than in the Carolingian manuscripts. And it has to do also with the introduction of new dyes. And I especially think about cockit dye. And Maurizio and our team is working when exactly and under what conditions this cockit dye was introduced as a new dyeing medium that then could be mixed with different blue and pigments and also ochre to create these fantastic shadings of pink to light violet to darker violet. And I think there is really also one element that a new color becomes available, or a new colorant becomes available, that is linked to this development.
Bien, merci à tous pour votre participation et à nos orateurs. Nous vous donnons rendez-vous à 14h pour la reprise de la première séance de l'après-midi. Et j'invite les participants à nous suivre pour le déjeuner qui est prévu dans un instant.